February. This is Democracy Now!, and now we're going to go to nearby Brazil, and we are joined in our studio, in our firehouse studio here, by one of the extraordinary people's artists of Latin America. We go to Brazilian artist and activist Augusto Boal, who sees theater as a dialogue and an opportunity to act out social change. Drawing on Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, Boal developed theater of the oppressed out of his experimental work at the Arena Theater in Sao Paulo during the 1950s and 60s. Boal took the theater to factories and farms throughout Brazil and developed plays around the experiences of people silenced by poverty and oppression. Boal's plays were increasingly censored by the government, and in 1971, the military dictatorship imprisoned him for 4 months. When he was released, he was forced into exile and spent 15 years in Argentina, Portugal, and France before returning to Rio. Theater of the oppressed techniques from, quote, invisible theater on the streets to solution-oriented forum theater spread around the world. Boal is in New York this week running a theater workshop at the Brecht Forum, and he joins us now in our studio. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you. Talk to us about how you got started in the 1950s in using theater and art to open up and explain and help folks in Brazil be able to deal with their social conditions.
Yeah, in the 50s I did not do theater of the oppressed. I did theater like everybody else, in which you call the spectator to come, you charge a price for the ticket, and then you do plays the best that you can. But soon I understood that I was doing good plays, wonderful plays for people that were good writers, for an audience that came just to look at it and say, okay, it's nice, and then they went away, nothing else happened. And always for me, theater should be more than that. Shakespeare used to say, not used to say, but he said in Hamlet that the theater should be and is like a mirror, in which we look at the mirror and then we see our vices and our virtues. I think that's very nice, but I would like to have a mirror with some magic properties, in which we could, if we don't like the image that we have in front of us, to allow us to penetrate into that mirror and then transform our image and then come back with our image transformed. The act of transforming, I always say, transforms she or he who acts. So to use the theater as a rehearsal for transformation of reality. This was my idea, but not my practice until the dictatorship was every time more severe on us and started forbidding our plays, not allowing us to do our plays, to do nothing. So when we lost our theater, we lost everything, we found theater.
This would have been the military dictatorship of the late 60s?
Yeah, it started from 64, and then it lasted until 80 and something, and some structures are still there. We talk about now we have democracy. What kind of democracy? Democracy is a word that you can fill in with whatever you want. I believe that words, they are like trucks, they are like means of transportation. You can put inside what you want. And democracy, we call democracy many countries in which you have to choose between two people that are very rich and buy time on the television, or you call democracy Greece, in which the women did not vote. We call democracy anything. We say that now in Brazil we have democracy, but that's not true. Half of the population cannot read or write. Half of the population live under the poverty limit of life, so that's not democracy.
Paulo Friere, many people have said you began to implement in theater some of his ideas and perspectives. Can you talk about how you began to develop the forum theater and your theater of the oppressed?
Yeah, Paulo Friere was a very good friend of mine, and he started more or less in the 60s. Once we were talking to try to remember when we have met for the first time. We do not remember well. We had the impression that we have met for all our lives. And his work inspired me, of course, and they developed parallel one to another. But of course, he wrote the Pedagogy of the Press first, and my title, Theater of the Press, is a homage to him. No? Well, how it started, when I was in the 70s, I was already persecuted by the police, by the army, by all of them, and then I could not do theater anymore. So I said, I cannot give the population the artistic product ready. So what I'm going to do is to try to give them the means of production. Then me and a group of my colleagues of the Arena Theater, we started developing what we call the newspaper theater, in which we would translate news from the newspaper into scenes, of theatrical scenes. But we would teach them how to do it, but we would not do for them. So we wanted to democratize the means of production. Then we developed lots of groups that did newspaper theater about their own problems. We worked in factories, we work in churches, because in Brazil there is a church which is very reactionary, but there is also a church which is very progressive, the theology of liberation and all that. Well, then we started doing that. I was arrested in 71, and then I had to leave the country, and then I went to Argentina. In Argentina, I had to do something also, and I like to do theater in the street. But my friend said, don't do theater in the street, because if you got arrested again here in Argentina, they will go to send you back to Brazil. And in Brazil, they did not arrest the same person twice. The second time, they killed directly. So someone had a good idea. He said, why don't we do the play, but we don't tell anybody that it is a play? So you can be there, and no one is responsible for anything, because you explode the scene in front of everyone. Everyone can participate. So we did that. We did what they call invisible theater. We went to a restaurant. It was a law that said that no Argentine could die from hunger, and every Argentine had the right to go into any restaurant and eat whatever they wanted, but not drink wine, not take dessert. The rest he could ask for 2-3 beefsteaks, and it would be okay. And then sign the bill and show the identity card in which they proved that they were Argentine. So I said, okay, let's go to a real restaurant instead of spending money to make the settings and spending money to make propaganda. Let's go to a real restaurant and play the play there. And then me, Augusto, I was sitting far away in another table eating my beef. So when we exploded the scene, everyone participated. And then it was very nice, because the actor became the spectator of the spectator who had become an actor. So the fiction and reality were overlapping. No? That was in Argentina. In Peru,
what was the reaction?
The reaction is always very good, because we never create violence. We want to reveal the violence that exists in society. We don't want to duplicate, we don't want to bring our violence, but just to show society is violent. If there is people who is dying from hunger and food is plenty, why should they die? So we try to show the absurdity of the system in which we live. You know?
And was the invisible theater actors, or your core, did you train more people to do it, or was it basically a small core that went all around the country?
In this beginning of the Theater of the Press, they were both. There were people, citizens, normal citizens, who wanted to make a theatrical experience, and some professional actors also. Today, I work with both, but separately. I have worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company, working in plays by Shakespeare, to try to show them some of the techniques of the Theater of the Press, interiorized techniques. No? But that's something. And something else is to work with everybody, because we believe that everybody can do theater. Everybody can do what one person can do, everyone can do. But not the same way, not with the same skills, but everyone can do with the same sincerity and the same means of expression.
Well, we're talking with Augusto Boal, the founder of Brazil's Theater of the Oppressed. We're going to take a break for 60 seconds for stations to identify themselves, and then we'll be back with him.
seu jeito de olhar eu me lembro bem. Fico querendo sentir o seu cheiro, é daquele jeito que ela tem. O tempo todo eu fico feito tonto, sempre procurando, mas ela não vem. E esse aperto no fundo do peito, desses que o sujeito não pode aguentar. Ai, esse aperto aumenta meu desejo, e eu não vejo a hora de poder lhe falar. Por isso eu vou na casa dela, ai, ai, falar do meu amor.
Welcome back to Democracy Now! I'm Juan Gonzalez, sitting in for Amy Goodman, who is in Italy, speaking at an event there in Italy today. We're joined by Augusto Boal, who is the founder of the Theater of the Oppressed movement in Brazil and globally. Boal is the author of several books, including his 2001 autobiography, Hamlet and the Baker's Son, My Life in Theater and Politics. And we're welcome back so we can continue the conversation. Could you talk to us about the Forum Theater? What is the Forum Theater and how did that develop?
The Forum Theater is exactly the image of the mirror. No? We present the problem because sometimes we know what the problem is. All of us agree we have this problem. So for instance, the workers that go to claim for better conditions of work or better salaries or whatever, everyone agrees. But how to do it, we don't know. So what we do, we present the play, whatever the theme is, whatever the problem is, we present the play, and then we look at like normal spectators. But at the end, we say, okay, this ended in failure. So how could we change the events? Everything is going to change in society, in our biological life. Everything is always changing. Nothing is going to stay the way it is. All is going to, so how can we change this for better? And then we start again the same play, and we invite the audience to, at any time that they want to say stop, go to replace the protagonist and show alternatives. So we learn from one another. You have in a scene the wrong solution, the wrong way. And then we try to see what is the right way. We don't know. We don't do the political theater of the 50s in which we had the propaganda, you had an idea, you have a message. We don't have the message, we have the questions. We bring the, what can we do? And democratically, everyone can say stop and jump on the scene and try a solution or an alternative. And then we discuss that alternative, and then a second and third, as many as people are there. So what we want is to develop the capacity of people to create, to use their intelligence, to use their sensibility. Because we live in a society which is very imperative, who says all of the time, do this, go that way, dress this way, eat that. And we don't want the orders, we don't want the imperative mood. We want to the subjunctive theater, in which you say, how would it be if it were like that? Then we ask the people, we bring questions, we don't bring certitudes, but the questions, the doubts are the seed of certitudes. Then some certitude comes out. But it is from everyone. Everyone has the right to speak their word and to act their thoughts. Not only to talk about, but to act their thoughts.
What has been the impact of the Theater of the Oppressed on the established theater or artistic movements within Brazil and in Latin America?
Yeah, I started doing that in Peru. In reality, when I was already in exile, I was directing the part of theater because the government at that time was a military government, but strangely enough, it was center-left. And they wanted to make programs of literacy programs, and I was in charge of the theater, so I started doing that. Now it's all over the world. We have in the web page, which is Theatre of the Oppressed altogether.org. No, theatre, but like the English right, theatre, not theater, yes. No, of the oppressed. Or we have 48 countries, but we know of more than 70 countries in which they do theatre of the oppressed. But all of them in their own themes. We don't tell them you have to do about this or that. For example, in India, they have an enormous movement. And what they do is about hunger, it's about unemployment, it's about the living conditions of their lives. But at the same time, you have also in Paris. So in Paris, they have treat problems. In New York, here, we have the Brecht Forum has a Theater of the Press laboratorium. And what do they discuss? The problems of New York, the problems of the United States, the problems of the relation of the United States, the government of the United States with the rest of the world. You know? We have in Nebraska, permanent center also, and we have Los Angeles. That's where I met Amy Goodman. She came to my lecture, and I went to her lecture, so we met there. So it's all over. It's very nice because it's a way of using theater in a dynamic way, not in a receptive way only, but in a dynamic way. To give you an example, which is a very beautiful example, we have many groups in Rio. We have groups of slums, of poor places, poor communities. Favelas, yes. We have groups of teachers. We have lots of groups, and one of them is a group of housemaids. They are all called Maria. Maria this, Maria that, Maria something. They are called Marias of Brazil. And then they are housemaids, real housemaids. They work like a housemaid, and the only day free they have is Sunday. So they come to the theater and they practice the theater. They present their plays. And once they wanted to do theater inside the theater. They said, what you tell us is that we do theater, but we play in churches, we play in the streets, we play everywhere, but not in a theater. We want to go in a theater. And I said, yes, but if we go there, we are not going to have the rituals of the theater in which you pay tickets. You will have to offer the tickets. And I said, no, but we want to see the curtain going up. We want to be in a real building. And then we did that. They were very happy. It was a great success, and at the end, they came to tell me that one of them was weeping after the show. And I said, but why? It was such a big success. They applauded so much. I asked her, why did you weep? And she said, look, it is very moving for us because we who work in house for the other people, we are supposed to be invisible. We should not appear. We should do everything, but not be present. And then today I was rehearsing, and there was a man throwing lights on me and say, come here so that we can see your body. We are not. We are taught to be mute. And there was a man putting a microphone here so that I could be heard. And I said, that's why you wept? And she said, no, it was in the show. I was playing there, I was showing my emotions, showing my thoughts and all that. And the family I worked for, in 10 years, they were all there in the theater, sitting silent, looking at me and in the dark. Mm-hmm. And I was there. I said, that's why you wept? And she said, no. I said, why did you weep? And she said, because when I went back to the dressing room, I looked at the mirror. And then I was afraid. I said, what did you see in the mirror? And she said, I saw a woman. And I said, but it's normal. If you look at the mirror, you see a woman. When I look at the mirror to shave, I see a man. And she said, no, but that was the first time I saw a woman in the mirror. And I said, but what did you see before? And she said, before I saw housemaids, and now I saw a woman. So the theater, by the fact that you go there and you show your ideas, you show your emotions, you show what your desires are, give you the right to have your own identity and not to keep the identity that they put on you. We all wear masks in society. In the theater, you take off the mask and you are yourself. That's the great advantage of the theater, especially the theater of the press, in which you can do that.
In your autobiography, you call it Hamlet and the Baker's Son, My Life in Theater and Politics. The title.
Yeah. The title is because my father was a baker. I worked with him very much when I was a child, and because I am Hamlet. I am always to be or not to be. I am a man of the theater, and I work with people who are not in the theater. I work with the peasants without land. In Brazil, it's a very big movement. Well, they are not artists, and I say, yes, you are. Then I convince them that they are artists, and they are artists, and then they show their art. So I'm always doing theater professionally because I want to show. I think that everyone can do theater, even actors. And theater can be done everywhere, even inside theater. So I want to be a director because I'm not an actor, and I want to use theater in a conventional way also, but I am the other side, what interests me more as citizen, because I think that sometimes people say, oh, you are politically minded or not. It's not you as an an artist. It's you as a citizen. If we're not a man of the theater, if I were a dentist, a veterinarian, if I were a doctor, if I were a worker, I had as a citizen to take a party, to say, well, I believe in this, let's change things in that way. So to be politically minded is a necessity of the citizen, not of the artist solely.
Your life in politics as well. You were a member of the Brazilian Workers' Party. That party is now in power in Brazil, and in the person of President Lula. What your sense of how Brazil, the most important country in Latin America in size and wealth and population, what have been the changes over the last few years under the Workers' Party?
I don't agree that we are in power. We are in the government.
Okay.
And the government has not the power that it wanted. I believe that there are many things that Lula and the government is doing which are extremely important. For instance, the treatment of the Hunger Zero, the program called Hunger Zero, in which they distribute, yes, it's assistantialism in some way, but they distribute money for people who are starving, and that's important. It's important even economically, because the money that you give to a person who is starving is going to buy he's going to buy food. It's not the same that if you distribute dividends, because it's going to be speculative money. So it's very important that that program, and it's very important for the families that have not salary, not at all, that live with less than $1 a day. Suddenly they can eat beans and rice, which is the national food, and that's good. I think that the external politics of Brazil is also extremely important, what they are doing. Lula, a few weeks ago, organized a meeting between the Arab countries and the South American countries. We are having ties with Argentina, with Venezuela, with Uruguay, which are more progressive governments too. So we are having contact with India. I think it's very important not to have only a bilateral relation with the United States, but to have with other countries to expand our relations. This is extremely important. What I don't find so important, what I find it's not sufficient, is, for instance, the external debt. We have paid the debt several times already as interest, and the debt has to be verified if it really exists. When Getúlio Vargas, decades ago, made an examination of the money that we were paying to the external banks, it was found out that we did not owe really not even half of what we were paying. And now the situation is the same. We don't owe what we are paying. We did not borrow that money. It was the dictatorship that borrowed, and not all. There are not the evidence, there are not the documents to prove that we owe so much money. So there, Lula has not touched this, goes on paying. And we know that in the economy there are absurdities that are taken for granted. For instance, what they call the risk country. It is the banks that lend the money, The banks decide if the country has a risk or not. In a unilateral way. They decide that you are running the risk of not being capable of paying your debt. So they raise the interest. Instead of lowering, they raise, and then you pay. If you paid, it was because you could pay, but they decide that you were a risk. Then you pay, and even so, they don't give you back the money. So they decide, you borrow some money, you don't know how much you are going to pay. And this for centuries. And what I believe is that a debt that cannot be paid because they are extremely big and they cannot be paid, they become a link of slavery. So we became a slave country. We are paying the banks. We are giving money to the banks. If we don't cut this bond of slavery, we are going on all of the time protesting because the salaries are low, because education are enough, health is worse, and that the part of the government that is not working.
Let me ask you, the we discussed earlier in the show, and you heard the discussion on Bolivia, the enormous changes that are occurring throughout Latin America politically compared to even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, which Brazil is a part. These elections that are bringing to power much more progressive or at least rebellious governments vis-a-vis the United States. And what do you think is happening to the everyday Latin American in terms of the enormous changes of the last few years?
I heard in the interview that you made a while ago a phrase that is very dear to my heart. He said, everything is possible. All is possible. That's what we don't believe. We believe that the things the way they are is the only thing that the only way realistically we can think it can be. But it's not true. The truth is what we heard in this program. Everything is possible. And then if we have in our minds that everything can be transformed, another world is possible, like in the forum, social forum, Porto Alegre, they said, we start preparing the change. If we believe, oh, that's the way it is, fatalistically, then nothing is going to happen. I believe in transformation. I believe that we say in the theater of the press that in the present we have to analyze the past, but to invent the future. It's not to analyze the past, to contemplate the past and say, oh, in the past it was like that. It is to think about the future and not believe that, well, that's the law or that legality or that's moral, because slavery was moral. A century ago or more, slavery was moral, was legal. You could have the property of a person, of a human being. Then you have to transform it. One thing is moral, the other thing is ethics. They are not the same. Moral is the way things are, it's legality. But legitimacy is an ethic. A drive. You have to think about another world in which there will be more fraternity, there will be more solidarity, and not so much competition, so too much, I want to be the first, we have to be all the first, not only to run a race and be the first and then look back and, oh, the other ones are far away, good for me. No.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us, Augusto Boal, the founder of the Theater of the Oppressed, which is now an international movement. He's here visiting in New York for a while. He's the author of several books, including his 2001 autobiography, Hamlet and the Baker's Son. That does it for today's show. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Sharif Abdel-Qaddus, Ana Noguera, Elizabeth Press, John Hamilton, Yoruba Richin, Maddie Harper, Nell Geiser, and Jeremy Scale. Mike DeFilippo is our engineer. Special thanks to Uri Gal, Angela Alston, Chris Zucker, and the whole team that makes this show possible. You can visit us on the web at democracynow.org. Sitting in for Amy Goodman, I'm Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Democracy Now!